Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And gentlemen, thank you for your statements, your responses, and your previous service to the country. Very much appreciated. I'll try not to cover things that have been asked previously if I understand what has happened appropriately. I wonder, this one is to you, Mr. Berger, in particular. It appears that the FBI was not active in monitoring or penetrating radical Muslim groups. Is that your understanding? And if you have something of that understanding, why was that the case?
I think that is my general understanding, Congressman, and I think that was pursuant to guidelines and directives that had been drawn up within the FBI in prior years, and perhaps reflected to some degree their view that the capability here was not substantial.
The capability within Al-Qaeda and related organizations was perhaps not substantial. That might have been their understanding.
That at least was what was conveyed. I think perhaps there were different understandings among different people in the FBI, but that certainly is.
Is it your view that the FBI did not seriously warn or understand, and then not warn, that there was a serious terrorism problem that could take place in the United States?
You know, I think there were certainly were people at the FBI, Dale Watson, Bear Bryant, the late John O'Neill, who understood this.
You talked about your weekly or twice a week meetings.
They were certainly there, and I think they were trying to deal with what I now understand better as a disconnect between headquarters and the field. So I think there were, you know, I think as an institution, and I think Mr. Mueller has acknowledged this, as an institution, at least as the time I left, which was yet in 2000, there's another 9 months. There was not a sense that there was the sense the capability that was here was logistical support, was not a serious threat, and was covered, was the word that they would use. We have it covered.
A question for both of you then. Does the United States need an MI5 or some modified MI5? And can you answer briefly why you think that would be the case or not the case?
I think that is one solution to the problem. The fundamental problem is that you need either to change the basic laws and responsibilities of the two intelligence agencies, FBI and CIA, or you need to build capabilities to match the legal responsibilities. Now, one way to do it in the FBI would be to create an MI5, which is a domestic intelligence without the law enforcement. Another way would be to create a separate career path. For example, for the National Security Division of the FBI, train them not as law enforcement officers the way they are now, but as intelligence analysts to do the job. There are other ways, but simply to say your primary duty right now has gone from law enforcement to counterterrorism is not going to produce a revolution inside the system.
Do you think there has been relatedly, I'll come to you, Mr. Berger, do you think there has been relatedly a disadvantage to an FBI person that moves into counter-espionage or counterterrorism for a significant part of their career?
Oh, yes, quite definitely. I mean, most of my information is anecdotal, but it's from talking to a wide number of people, including high FBI or Justice Department officials. And the people who don't make it in law enforcement are shunted off to the
And so
National Security Division.
and so it's possible for someone to be a homesteader in counter-espionage activities like Mr. Hansen, and therefore breach the compartmentation of
Well,
of
I'm
their
not sure
efforts.
about the specific cause and effect, but yes.
All right. Mr. Berger.
Congressman, my inclination would be to fix the FBI. I think there are dedicated, fine people there who care passionately about their country, who take risks every day. And it seems to me intuitively better, easier to fix and change the mission and deal with the organizational problems of an agency that exists than to do a greenfield operation someplace out in the Beltway. So I guess I see no inherent reason why it would be harder to fix the organizational problems in the FBI, reorient the mission, provide the leadership, than it would be to start from scratch. I think the people there are talented, dedicated, patriotic people who, if you tell them what their job is, they'll do it.
Thank you. I asked for your opinion, and I appreciate the fact that they're talented and energetic and patriotic. And it's something for further discussion, perhaps. Looking back at the situation, it seems to me that the intelligence community would desirably be able to tell us the kind of approaches that terrorists might take against our citizens, against our infrastructure in the United States, spelling out the delivery methods, the techniques, and so on. And if you look at the testimony presented yesterday by Eleanor Hill, which constitutes, in effect, a part of our committee's report, the Joint Committee, and just focusing on one type of approach that was used, the use of commercial airliners as flying bombs. We have these items in our chronology. We have, of course, the Manila plot, where part of it was an attempt to bring aircraft to crash into the CIA headquarters. In August '98, intelligence community obtained information a group of unidentified Arabs planned to fly an explosive-laden plane into a foreign country, from a foreign country into the World Trade Center. September '98, intelligence community obtained information that Osama bin Laden's next operation would possibly involve flying an aircraft loaded with explosives into a U.S. airport and detonating it. In the fall of '98, the intelligence community received information concerning bin Laden's plot involving aircraft in the New York and Washington, D.C. areas. April 2001, the intelligence community obtained information from a source with terrorist connections who speculate that bin Laden would be interested in commercial pilots as potential terrorists. So these are the things that were specifically identified as some of the things coming in that were geographically not specific, time uncertain, of course. And that's just one method of delivering terrorism in this country. But what surprises, I think, the American public, and what shocks me, is that there seemed to have been no place in the federal government, as far as I can find it, that examined the information then about potential delivery methods of terrorism and said, this is how we counteract it, this is how we prevent or avert it. These are the kind of procedures that have to work between the FAA and the FBI, or between the FBI and the INS. And given the fact that there didn't seem to be any agency responsible for that, and indeed it's a multi-agency problem, and no one specifically looking at details of how to approach that, I guess I would have turned to expect it in the National Security Council. But now, hopefully, we'll have the Director of Homeland Security and the new department with that very specific responsibility. But that is all categorized as an intelligence failure. And it seems to me it goes far beyond that. I would welcome any response of you two gentlemen who have been national security advisors as to how it is that our government didn't meet its citizens' expectations by having a focused look at how these means of terrorism could be delivered upon our country.
Congressman, first of all, recognize that there were mountains of intelligence information. Someone said we were drowning in information. They related to a wide variety of possible means, from truck bombs and car bombs to assassinations and an infinite, not infinite, but a very wide-ranging variety of modalities. As I said in my testimony, we did not, and I do not recall receiving anything that focused specifically on the threat of airlines as weapons. Certainly it was known as one of many possibilities. There was, chaired by the National Security Council, a counterterrorism security group whose job was to look at cross-agency information. It was only as good as what it was given, and obviously, I've checked, it did not receive the February '98 report, for example, that you referred to. So there was nothing that made this stand out any more than any other another range of threats. But that's history. I mean, I do believe, as I said in my testimony, that a Department of Homeland Security ought to have a fusion cell where all of the agencies are there, all of the raw data is available. The fusion cell is able to task, follow up. I think that because the volume of threat information, some of it unextracted from its digital form, is so great that we have to have a new mechanism for extracting patterns.
General Scowcroft, do you have a comment?
I agree with most of what Mr. Berger said. I think that we need to look more closely than we have, because this is still fairly new, at the best way to go about the intelligence job. Is it to look at all the things that can be done to us? Is it to look at all the people who could do it? Is it a connection of both? And how do you do either one? And we're a long way from that. We have analyzed different parts better than we had the use of aircraft, for example. It's going to be very hard to stay ahead of people anyway. But I think the specific answer to your question is Homeland Security is designed to be an answer to it. I tend not to agree with Senator Shelby and Mr. Berger about the solution, though. I don't think replicating the intelligence community inside Homeland Security I think it's dodging the problem rather than solving it. But a fusion center needs to be done.
I have one more area of questions. It relates to the military and their past and future use in the war on terrorism. Mr. Berger and General Scowcroft, both of you, do you feel that there has been any reluctance on the part of the military to have become engaged in the war on terrorism, or do you think that there has been a reluctance on the part of the civilian leadership of the country to employ them? And I raise a couple of other questions relatedly. Why is it, for example, that we had no military response to the boat attack, small boat attack on the USS Cole? Did our policy structure suggest that the primary focus of dealing with Al-Qaeda terrorism was, or even is, the law enforcement and intelligence community, unless we are formally engaged in going into a country like we did in Afghanistan?
Congressman, let me try to answer all three of your questions. We, both the President and myself, spoke to Secretary of Defense, Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff on numerous occasions about boots on the ground options in Afghanistan. And they looked at them, I believe, seriously. And their assessment, this is pre-9/11. We don't have Pakistan, we don't have Uzbekistan, we don't have Tajikistan, we don't have any of those neighbors. Their assessment was that given the distance for staging, given the likelihood of detection, given the inability to have forces proximate for backup, that it, and most importantly, in the absence of actionable intelligence, that it was likely to fail. I don't believe that actually was risk aversion. I think that that was not an unreasonable assessment under the circumstances.
How would you assess the military's attitude about their involvement? Not
well, we're in an entirely new situation now. 9/11 has galvanized the world to go to war, and a full-scale war that I think was not possible, not thinkable before. And I think the military in the war in Afghanistan has performed very well. But you're really talking about special operations kinds of, I don't know what you're, if one is talking about special operations, it is something we pressed on, it is something that we got, I think, a response to, and I don't think the response was necessarily an unreasonable one under the circumstances. Number two, you asked about the coal, which happened in October of 2000. When we left office, neither the intelligence community nor the law enforcement community had reached a judgment about responsibility for the coal. That judgment was reached sometime between the time we left office and 9/11. So we, even with 9/11, people said, show us the proof. We did not have a judgment from the intelligence community of responsibility on the coal when we left.
Are you surprised that there was no military response when it became clear that al-Qaeda was responsible?
I leave that to the people from the Bush administration to address whether this was part of a larger plan on their part. I really would prefer to address my own tenure. On the question of law enforcement versus military, after 9/11, after August '98, after we knew we had responsibility for an attack that killed 12 Americans, we were not pursuing a law enforcement model. The cruise missiles are not generally conceived of as a law enforcement technique. We were trying to kill bin Laden and his lieutenants. And so I know there's been a lot of discussion of that. The FBI is an investigative arm. They are an instrument for trying to find out what happened. But we are in a war, and it takes the instruments of war to fight that.
Thank you. General Scowcroft, would you have any comments on the subjects that I brought up?
Yes, I would. I think that part of the problem is the nature of terrorism and terrorist organizations. It seems to me your question is basically that of retaliation if going after in an attempt to deter further action and so on. I suggest that that's irrelevant to terrorist organizations. If you knock some of them out, they don't care very much. As long as they're there, they'll go on. This is poor man's war. It seems to me we're not going to have maybe any more situations like Afghanistan, where you had a terrorist organization protected by the government. And the military operation was really after the government forces, primarily. Maybe too much. But most of it now is going to be terrorists hiding in states where control over all our territories is insecure, or where you don't have a fully operating government, Yemen, Somalia, those kinds of things. And it's a war where our vaunted military machine is pretty largely ineffective, other than some of the intelligence aspects of it, because it's not military destruction we're after. It's finding these people. Getting rid of them is easy if you can find them and pin them down.
Congressman, can I add one thought? I don't want to intrude on your time, but it has occurred to me since 9/11 that we have had, since the beginning of the Cold War, essentially a threat-based approach to national security. We built NORAD so we could have detection, so that we could respond. And part of what this committee is doing is trying to figure out how we get better intelligence, so we can have threat, so that we can have warning. But with this new enemy, I think we have to think about not only threat-based protection, but vulnerability-based protection. We have to look at each of these systems and see where the vulnerabilities are, because we will not always have warning with this kind of enemy. We started to do that by looking at focusing on critical infrastructure in the 90s, but I think the real task of the Department of Homeland Security and all of us is to look to beef up our ability, obviously, to get them, fight offense, and get warning, but recognize that we also have to look at all of our systems, our critical systems, from a vulnerability point of view, whether that's companies or government, and have a much higher threshold of security in a vulnerability sense.